All right, so Unit 2, the Revolutionary Era. Today we're going to be talking about the American Revolution. Now, last time we met, folks, we talked about this coercive acts and how the British had passed the Boston Port Act that took away their free trade and travel. We talked about how they passed the Massachusetts Government Act that took away the town meetings and general court. And we also talked about how they declared martial law in Boston. Now, this is all happening specifically and only in Boston. But why might the other colonists be concerned about the coercive acts? Because it's possible that the British could do the same thing to New York or Virginia or Atlanta or Savannah. The other colonists are concerned that if the British are willing to take away all the rights of these Bostonians, what's to prevent them from taking away from my colonies and my country and my city in the future too? And so they're concerned rightly. And so the first thing that they do is they meet in 1774 at something called the First Continental Congress. And at the First Continental Congress, 12 of the 13 colonies meet. The only one that did not show up was Georgia. Georgia was very loyal to England at the time, and so they opted not to attend. But 12 of the 13 arrived to discuss what was happening. This Congress was led by or presided by John Hancock, right here featured. He was the president of the First Continental Congress, John Hancock. He was the president of the First Continental Congress. By the way, if you ever go to Boston and you see his grave, the top of the monument that he built on his grave, his family logo is a hand and then a rooster underneath it. It's Hancock. So it's a hand and then a rooster because his name is Hancock. So that's his family logo. It's a hand and a rooster. Anyway. So the First Continental Congress was presided by John Hancock, and they met for a few reasons. Number one, they met to show support for Boston. They met to show support for Boston. They wanted to say, Boston, we feel for you. We want to support you, at least show our support for Boston. That's why they met. The second reason why they met was to condemn the coercive acts. They wanted to condemn the coercive acts. They wanted to condemn the coercive acts. The Boston Port Act, the Massachusetts Government Act. They said this is too much, and they wanted to condemn it. So they met to support Boston. They met to condemn the Boston Port Act. And ultimately, they decide we have to do something about this. We can't just sit idly by while the king takes away the rights of Bostonians, because this could happen to us too. So they meet and they discuss, what should we do? And they say, I know what we should do. We should write a letter to the king. And they're like, it's a good idea, because we like that. We like writing letters. So, a letter. And they write a letter called the Declaration of Rights and Grievances in 1774. And in the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, they talk about two things. Can you guess what they are? Their rights and their grievances. Now, who can tell me what a grievance is? Something that bothers you. What else? What they're upset about, their complaints. It's their frustrations, right? Their griefs, their anger, where that's coming from. And so, in this Declaration of Rights and Grievances, they first talk about, really what they wanted was, they wanted their rights restored. They wanted their rights restored. They're upset about all the acts, like the Proclamation and Townsend, whatever, say, we want our rights back. That's what we want. We want our rights back. And they also said their rights that they wanted specifically were what? Self and self-taxation. So they said, we deserve our rights back. We want self-government and self-taxation. And that's all we want. Folks, in this document, they also made very clear, look, King George III, we pledge our loyalty to you. We want to be loyal British citizens. All that we want, all that we need is what? We just want our rights back. We just want our self-government. We just want our self-taxation. And we will be loyal British citizens. And we will do what you say, provided that it falls within our democracy. But we will be loyal. We will fight for you. We will pay taxes so long as you ask us to pay taxes. And then we'll do it. We'll be loyal, we promise. And they also made clear that, look, we're not in favor of revolution. We're anti-revolution. Because do they want to break away at this point? No, they don't. They don't want to break away. They don't want a revolution. All they want to do, again, is what? Just get their rights back. We can let bygones be bygones. We can forget everything. Just give us our rights back and everything will be cool. Pretty much, folks, they want to return to salutary neglect. I mean, that's what they want, right? They just want to return to that salutary neglect time. That's ideal for them. But they do say, if you don't give this to us, what are they threatening? Not revolution, not yet. But if you don't give us what we want, what are we going to do? And we know you don't like this. They threatened another boycott. And this time, their boycott was going to be organized into something called the Continental Association. So it has a name, which means it's going to be pre-organized. So they called it the Continental Association. And this is a complete boycott of all British goods. It had three elements: non-importation, non-exportation, and non-consumption. So it was a complete boycott of all British goods. Non-importation, non-exportation, and non-consumption. Now, what does non-importation mean? What are we not going to do? Yeah, we're not going to allow British goods back into our colonies. What's non-exportation?
They won't export any.
Yeah, we're not going to send the British any of our goods. And what's non-consumption?
You're not going to use any of them.
Yeah, we won't use any existing British goods already in the colonies. Okay, so non-importation, non-exportation, non-consumption. I mean, they're hoping for a full boycott of all British goods. Now, with regard to all of this, some women did also get involved, and some women participated in what are known as spinning bees as part of the boycott. What are spinning bees? What do you think they did, these women who were also assisting in the boycott of British goods? What do you think their role was? What were they doing?
Oh, sounds like they're making clothes.
Huh?
Sounds like they're making clothes or something.
They were making clothes. Because normally, where would they get their clothes from? The British, but they're boycotting. So the colonial women will make their own clothes to assist in the boycott. Because you know how there were Sons of Liberty? There were also Daughters of Liberty. There were also Daughters of Liberty. Anyone who broke the boycott, folks, what do you think we as the Sons of Liberty did to them? Tarred, feathered, harassed, whatever else. If you broke the boycott, you're not a true patriot, we'll harass you. Well, the British do respond. What am I doing? They respond with something called the conciliatory proposal. The British receive the letter, and they respond with the conciliatory proposal. They read what the colonists wanted, said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that, but here's a solution. Here's what we think is a fair compromise, they said. What if the British decided which taxes and the colonists, they would collect the taxes? Huh? Pretty good? What do you think, colonists? We will still reserve the right to decide which taxes to tax you on and how much, but as an olive branch, we'll let you collect it. At least you're part of the process. How did the colonists respond to this? They refuse because what does this still not give them? It still does not give them their rights. It still does not give them self-taxation. That's just giving them a job to do. That's like, okay, fine. We'll decide the tax, but you collect it, so you deal with all the angry people. Okay, so you deal with that. We'll just sit safely back in England while you make everyone angry. That's the compromise. So the colonists refused. The colonists refused, and in response, the British declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion. And because they declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion, what are the British allowed to do?
Attack them?
Use force. Right? They're in a state of rebellion now, giving the British, or allowing the British to use force against the Bostonians and the Massachusettsians. Good so far. Again, and has any violence broken out yet? Just letters being sent back and forth here. Well, we know that the British are angry that the British have declared us to be in a state of rebellion. So do we expect them to send troops? Most definitely. So I'll tell you when you need to write it down. But what happened then was that the Sons of Liberty knew that the British were on their way, that they were going to come and try to disarm our weapons. They're going to take away our guns so we would not be able to rise up against them. And these weapons were held in Lexington and Concord, so we had to make sure that these guys were prepared for that. They also wanted to arrest two people. They wanted to arrest Samuel Adams. Why Samuel Adams? Yeah, he was using propaganda, and he was a leader of the Sons of Liberty. And they also wanted to arrest John Hancock. Why John Hancock?
He's the leader of the...
He was the president of the First Continental Congress, which the British just felt like was not an appropriate meeting to be having. And so they decided to send British troops, but the Sons of Liberty said, we have to be ready, we have to be prepared, we can't let them catch us off guard. And so the Sons of Liberty went to the towns and they said, you men, farmers, what we want you to do is to form a militia, a small army of sorts. You don't have to do it today, but we're going to give you a signal. Every night, I want you to look towards Boston to the Old North Church. It's the tallest steeple in that entire city. And every night, I want you to look in that direction. Because we're going to give you a signal when the British come. And if the British come by land, I'm going to shine one lantern. And you'll know that they're coming by land. And if I shine two lanterns, you'll know the British are coming by sea. But watch every night. And when you see those lights, you get ready. You get ready, you get prepared, you grab those guns, and you prepare for that fight. And I want you to be ready in how long? A minute. Hence the term, Minutemen. Okay, so they're going to get ready in a minute. So, for days on end, we wait for the British to show up. We know that they're coming, but we don't know when. And then slowly, in the cover of the fog of night, you start hearing these British ships coming by sea, and you think, they're here. And so one of the Sons of Liberty races through. He charges past all these British posts. He runs right into Old North Church. He kicks open the door. He runs up the stairs, up this steeple, up into the tower, and he lights two lanterns and he shines it. And he hopes and he prays that the farmers are watching that night. But this has caused a lot of commotion. The British know that something is amiss, and so they start running into the church, and he sees this man, and he hears them, so he runs down the stairs, he pushes past the British guards, he jumps out a window, and he keeps on running, and he warns all the Sons of Liberty that the British have come. At this point, this brings us to the story of our good friend, Paul Revere. And actually, can you grab the left light in the back, please? This brings us to the story of our good friend, Paul Revere. And Paul Revere here, who looks surprisingly like Jack Black. He does. He looked like Jack Black. Like, if they were related, I would not be surprised. But Paul Revere, he then makes his midnight ride, right? Where he starts warning, he jabs on his horse, is charging through the city of Boston, screaming, the British are coming, the British are coming. He races all the way through Lexington and Concord, and he warns them, and then by the nightfall, everyone knows, and they're all sprung up and ready to fight the British, right? No, that's not how it happened. I know that's what they told you, but that's not what happened. So the guy runs down the stairs. He jumps out a window. He tells the Sons of Liberty. And then Paul Revere does get on his horse, but he doesn't do it on his own. He also rides with Samuel Prescott and William Dawes because this is one task too big for just one guy. And so these three men start charging off, and they don't scream the British are coming because, one, they're also British. It doesn't make sense to scream the British are coming. It doesn't. That's like if the U.S. Army was going to invade California and they started screaming, the Americans are coming, the Americans are coming. I too am American. So that makes no sense. Two, they wouldn't have been screaming at the top of their lungs because they were trying to warn people that the British were coming. And if the British saw these three men screaming at the top of their lungs that the British are coming, what might they have done? Shot them, stopped them, saying, hey, be quiet. So they would have been the worst spies in the world, which, by the way, that's what they were supposed to be. You don't see James Bond being like, okay, I'm here, and I'm going to stop you, and I am also a spy. That doesn't happen. So they didn't scream the British are coming. In fact, what they should have screamed was either the redcoats are coming, the redcoats are coming, or the regulars are coming. The regulars, like the regular army is coming. And again, they didn't race down screaming because they would have been caught. Also, Paul Revere did not finish the midnight ride. William Dodds and Samuel Prescott did. Paul Revere did not because he did journey quite a long way, and then he got tired at some point, so he stopped at a bar. At that bar, he was bragging about how, oh, yeah, part of Sons of Liberty, and the British are on their way. He was bragging about how, like, you know, he was warning all these people, and there were some British soldiers in the bar, and they overheard him, and they arrested him. He never even finished. But William Dodds and Samuel Prescott did. So that's what happened with the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Now, why is it called the midnight ride of Paul Revere? Because in the 1880s, 1890s, our good friend Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a beautiful poem about the British are coming, to kind of create this narrative of how American and epic we are. But it didn't happen that way. So that was kind of a lie. So when you go to Paul Revere's house, if you ever go to Boston, again, you could say, this is the house where that thing that you think Paul Revere did not actually happen. And then you just present. And then you can just stand there and just educate people. Like if a tour guide's walking by, like, Paul Revere made that bit, like, no, that is not what, don't listen to her. She is misinformed. Come here, let me talk to you and your friends real quick. Let me tell you what really happened. And then actually what I want you to do is when you speak people and like you try to correct them, the term I want you to say is actually, and then speak like a really annoying voice just to like correct them. Like, actually, that's not what happened. I really want you to do that though. When you hear, yeah, although you may think that Paul Revere's midnight ride happened, no, it did not. Here's why. But the Minutemen were warned. They did see the lanterns lit. They were prepared. They did get ready. And when the British did arrive, they were prepared. And the British were actually quite shocked about this. And because of that first encounter, you have the first battle of the American Revolution, known as the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And so after all of that, folks, this leads up to the first battle, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. At the Battle of Lexington and Concord, again, this is the beginning of the American Revolution, the first battle. And there's no turning back at this point, right? Because has blood been shed? And that's kind of a problem. So we pretty much have begun full-scale war. That's pretty much what we think it is. Anyway, folks, there's no turning back at this point, and people are concerned because do they think this is going to get blown out of proportion now? Like, this is being really crazy. So everyone's really concerned. In fact, the death toll, you don't have to write any of this down, but it's always interesting. 73 British soldiers died and over 400 were wounded. But on the American side, 49 died and only 17 were wounded. And why is that? That so few Americans were killed, while the British, so many, were hurt or killed? Well, the Americans are on their land, definitely. And what type of style of fighting are the Americans using? Guerrilla warfare, or guerrilla warfare. Spelled G-U-E, not G-O. G-O is a very different kind of warfare. It's like throwing gorillas at people and being like, oh! And guerrilla warfare is more like you hide and you shoot. It's really guerrilla warfare, like you hide in the trees, hide behind the wall. Yeah, it's more elusive. It's not like you stand out and you shoot people, but you're hiding all the time. That's guerrilla warfare. So the Americans used guerrilla warfare while the British shot how? Like in straight lines, right? They were straight lines the entire time. The straight lines are because of discipline, and we'll talk about why they use straight lines later. But guerrilla warfare. Also, guerrilla just means like warlike. So it's actually warlike warfare, which doesn't really make any sense. But you know, language. It's fun. Anyway, so war has broken out and the colonists are again quite concerned. And so they convene the Second Continental Congress, worried about what may happen next. Because are they afraid that this war might get out of hand? It might go beyond their control. So they start worrying about what's going to happen. Like, oh, what are we going to do? These people, like, did they tell these colonists to fight against the British? Did they tell them to take up arms? What they're worried about is these guys are going to go and start randomly shooting people, and we're going to be responsible. We have to do something. So at the Second Continental Congress, they do the following. The first thing that they do is create or send the king another letter. This is known as the Olive Branch Petition. And typically an olive branch signifies what? Peace. So they're hoping that, again, this will be a symbol of peace. Like, king, we want to send you an olive branch petition. Okay? This is another letter to the king. And again, they only asked for a few things. They said, look, king, all we want is what? Our right. We just want our freaking rights back. To give us back our rights. Self-taxation, self-representation. That's not too much to ask. You did it for 150 years. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that. That's what they want. And they also said, besides their rights, they also said, look, we're still loyal. We again pledge our loyalty to you. We are still loyal citizens of the British Empire if you let us. They stated that they wanted to prevent further bloodshed. They wanted to prevent bloodshed or war. No, we can still walk away from this. I know that 49 are dead, 17 are dead, but that's not that much really in the scheme of things. We can prevent the deaths of thousands. We'll forgive the Boston Massacre. We'll forgive everything. We'll just say sorry, let bygones be bygones, and we'll walk away. We'll be loyal. We'll just, sum it up to like a crazy year. But we can walk away from this. We can prevent war. But they did also say, but we understand that you may not agree with our philosophy and what we believe. So in the event that you don't respond in time, or in the event that you disagree, we do reserve the right to defend ourselves. Which is pretty important. Because are these going to wait loyally until the British king responds to them? While the British army is attacking their shores and, invading their cities? No, it's like, if the British army points a gun at you, like, I'm loyal, I'm not going to fight back. I want to prove that I'm a good person. No, it's like, I'm going to defend myself, and I want you to understand that. The longer you delay, we will defend ourselves because we have no choice. You've brought your army to our shores. So we're going to defend ourselves. So that's what they said. And so they sent the letter, hoping, the cross and everything. Oh, I hope that this will happen. I hope we'll be safe. And they send the letter away. But this idea of defending ourselves is important. And they realize that in order to defend ourselves, what are we as a colony going to need? How are we going to defend ourselves against the British? What do we need to defend ourselves? We need weapons. We're going to only have some of that. We need an army. They decide, and someone motions, in order to defend ourselves, I believe that we should create a Continental Army to unite all of our forces, to fight against the British until they respond or until we ultimately decide to declare our independence. Now, remember, up until this point, where is all the fighting taking place so far?
The colonies.
But where specifically in the colonies? just in Boston, just in Massachusetts, just in the North. And so if we create this Continental Army, who is going to be part of that army? Everyone's going to be part of it, like the southern colonies, the middle colonies, the other New England colonies. And so some of the southerners, especially Senator Rutledge from South Carolina, says, oh, so who of you Bostonians is going to be leading my troops in this Continental Army? Because does a South Carolinian want a northerner to lead his troops? No, I guess that idea of, if I'm from South Carolina, who do I defend? South Carolina. Boston defends Boston. Virginia protects Virginia. They're trying to get away from that, though. And he says, who among you Bostonians would lead this Continental Army? And, none of the Massachusetts were like, I don't know. None of us are going to do it. But Benjamin Franklin, he was recognized on the chair floor. He's like, I believe that there's no other man in this room that would be worthy of the honor of leading this Continental Army than the great delegate from Virginia, Colonel George Washington. And everyone was like, yeah, George Washington's pretty good. I like George Washington. And so they appoint George Washington to be the general of the Continental Army. And George Washington stands up and he says, if the Continental Congress will offer me this great opportunity to lead the Continental Army, I will humbly accept. And he accepted with such grace and charisma, like he just walks out of the room and it was like everyone's like, whoa, that guy is pretty good. So the question is, why George Washington? So why George Washington is the question, because it is important that it was George Washington and not someone else. So why George Washington? Number one, he is a respected military figure. We know this already, folks. When did he last fight? The French-Indian War, right? So he fought in the French-Indian War where we found out he was immortal. So impressive, right? So there's George Washington, respected military figure. He's also a patriot, folks. He's a patriot. He genuinely loves these colonies. We knew this because while all those Bostonians were being killed, he wore a black armband around his arm to kind of remember those being killed in the conflict in the North, which shows as he feels some connection to those Northerners. He's not just some random Virginian fighter. Like, I feel like these are my brothers, and that resonated with Northerners. Yes.
Is that like his actual hair?
That is likely a wig. Very likely a wig. He was a patriot. He was also very well liked. He was charismatic. But the really important thing about George Washington being appointed is that he was a Virginian. And he was a Virginian willing to fight where? In Massachusetts. That's so important because he's a Southerner willing to fight a Northern war. And so George Washington, he symbolically did what with the colonies? He united them, guys. He is a unifying figure. That's why it was so important. If we chose someone from the North to fight this war, this would have remained what? A Northern war. But because a Southerner is fighting in this Northern war, it becomes whose war? Everyone's war. That's why it's so significant. He is a unifying figure. Also, he's a common aristocrat. George Washington, what does an aristocrat mean? Someone who's what? Very rich, very wealthy. But from the stories that you've heard, was George Washington born rich? No, he was not born rich at all. He was a commoner, but he married into wealth. He married very well into Martha Washington family. And so, why does everyone like him? Because he understands everyone, right? Like, can commoners talk to him? Because he gets that. He understands what it likes to be a commoner. But do wealthy people like him too? Because he's super rich. And so he's also unifying among the classes. So he can lead the lowest soldier and the highest general. Does that make sense, folks? He unifies class and region. He was a great choice, except for the fact that he was a terrible general. He was not good at his job. But did he inspire people? Oh, yes, he did. He commanded them to do the wrong things. And he still won that war, luckily. I mean, honestly, the historians say that if you were really a military strategist, you would like, George Washington, what should we do? And then you would do the complete opposite. And you would more likely to win. He lost several battles, folks. But did he still win the war? That's what matters, right? He still won the war. All right, so George Washington is appointed, and he's now the leader of this Continental Army. And in the meantime, do we wait for the king's response to Olive Branch petition? We wait for the response. Well, time has passed and things will change. And you will see this shift from rebellion to revolution. In the last few minutes or so, we've been talking about how all they wanted was just what, folks? Their rights. That's a rebellion. And if they got their rights back, were they willing to say, yeah, let's just go back to normal? But then something changed. And all of a sudden, getting their rights back just wasn't good enough anymore. They needed a revolution. They wanted their own country. They wanted to be independent. And that's a huge shift. So the question is, what happened in like 11 months? How is it that in 11 months we went from being, just give us our rights back, to no, screw that, we want to govern ourselves? Because that is a huge shift. So we're going to talk about what changed. Any guesses, by the way, as to what changed? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Like, what do you think maybe shifted us from going from rebellion and just give us our rights back to a revolution? Any guesses? Yeah, Emma? Okay, so maybe this idea of like patriots and loyalists are like shifting away, and that's becoming more antagonized in the colonies. Any other possible guesses? Sadie?
It's kind of like when they got what they wanted, they didn't want that anymore, they just wanted more.
So like maybe they got close. They're like, you know what? We realized that's not good enough anymore. We want something more. Sure. Any other guesses to what this may have been?
Pride.
Huh?
Pride.
Pride. Maybe it's an issue of pride. Like, we're fighting just for this. Maybe we can get more. Like, I believe we are more. We deserve more, perhaps. Okay. Well, let's look at the concrete reasons why. Number one, casualties of war. Folks, like 5 or 10 or 100 people were dead. Was it enough to say that these people died so we can get our rights back? I mean, like, that's okay. Like, yeah, 100 people died so we can get our rights back. But several months have passed and thousands have died. Can we still say, yeah, I know that you killed my brother, my sister, my town, my grandfather, my family, whatever else, but so long as you say sorry, things will be okay. Is sorry good enough anymore? No. So the casualties of war changed everything because we had to justify these deaths. We had to justify them. Thousands dead. And all we're going to go back to normal, the way things were, and just forget that you murdered all these people? That's okay? And then God said, no. People have been killed. Scores of people have been killed. And we can't simply just say, oh, just apologize and we'll let bygones be bygones. Maybe a year ago, maybe 100 people dead, but you're talking thousands. And if that happens, then you're saying we get all of our rights back, but we're still under some other guy's government, the same guy who murdered our friends and family? That's not okay with me. Does that make sense? They had to justify those deaths, and just saying sorry wasn't good enough anymore. Second reason, the Hessians. The British hired Hessians, who were what? German mercenaries. What's a mercenary?
A hired soldier.
A soldier for hire. It's a soldier for hire. Okay. So they hired mercenaries or soldiers for hire. And the colonists were upset about this also because they said that the British brought outsiders. They brought outsiders to their internal conflict. This was between you and me. And now you have to go and bring the Germans in? Why'd you have to go tell them? That's like if you were fighting with your parents, you're all angry with each other, and then she calls your Uncle Charlie, and then like your Uncle Charlie calls you and starts telling, why are you talking to your mom? So man, like, why did you tell Uncle Charlie? You and I had a problem. You had to go tell someone else? What good did that do? And then are you angrier that other people know about your business? That's kind of what happened here. The British could have handled this on their own, but as they brought in outsiders, they said, you messed up, England. You made this a bigger conflict than it was. Before, it was just a civil conflict. You brought in other countries. You messed up. You had to go and bring Uncle Klaus into this. You know, now Klaus is coming in, and he's going to tell us what to do. No, that's not okay. So there's this frustration of making it almost a global conflict. The British did that. The third reason, the Prohibitory Act. So the king did respond to the Olive Branch petition. This was the king's response to the Olive Branch petition. And instead of saying things like, yeah, I agree with the Olive Branch petition, we can have peace again. Instead, he said, no, not going to do any of that. Instead, all colonies are now declared to be in a state of rebellion. And why was that such a bad move for him? Before the Prohibitory Act, which was the only colony in a state of rebellion, Massachusetts, and were all the other colonies like kind of still on the fence about fighting? But by saying that they're all in a state of rebellion, how might that change things in the colonies? Are they all going to be angry and upset and frustrated? Yeah. Those that were on the fence, like, I don't know, maybe I'll still be loyal to the king. Oh, wait, now I'm a traitor? Okay, I'm going to go fight. I'm going to go fight because the king just labeled me a traitor. The letter said all those meeting to subvert the king's authority will be found and hung. All those working against the British will be hung. All that are conspiring against the British government will be hung. I mean, like clear, straight. We're going to murder everyone that's trying to subvert this government, and we will restore control. And that, like, all the people that were just talking about it, the people that were even like moderate but still talking in the First Continental Congress, he just said, we're going to kill all of you if you don't get back in line. And so those on the fence, they just said, okay, then I'm going towards revolution. If this is the type of government that we live under, it's not for me. So that happened. And was this a really bad idea on the king part? Yeah. He could have like kept most of the colonies at least, moderate for a while. Instead, he just kicked them over to the other side. Last reason, Thomas Paine, or you know him as T-Paine. T-Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. And Common Sense was a pamphlet that explained why independence made sense. It explained why independence made sense. And I'm just going to just state a few things he said in his pamphlet. You can write any of these down. You already have the main point of it. But he said things like, we've complained a lot and nothing has changed. And the problem is that we have this new democracy that's being governed by an outdated monarchy. We deal with all this corruption by a government that doesn't listen to us, by a king and a parliament that are tyrants and telling us what to do. Why should a small island govern a massive continent? Why should someone 3,000 miles away govern us? Why should we give up our independence, our rights? Does it make any sense to remain part of the British Empire? And so people they'd be like, yeah, this guy has a point. And point after point after point, he tried to outline why it didn't make any sense to be part of the British Empire anymore. And that did resonate with people. Because it wasn't emotion, right? He was going after emotion, but he was also going after this fact. It's a monarchy, we're a democracy. That's 3,000 miles away, we're here. We had rights before, now we don't. And are things better when we know they were neglecting us? It was. And so we outlined all these key points. And did that convince a lot more people to shift over? This proved to be very effective, by the way. That was one of the major reasons why those on the fence shifted. So, on June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee from Virginia, he rises in the Continental Congress, and John Hancock recognizes the delegate from Virginia, and Richard Henry Lee says, I motion that these colonies ought to be free and independent states. And when he says that, the entire room bursts up into anger and debate and arguing, because there are those that don't think it's time, others think that it is time, and they're yelling back and forth, and it's pandemonium. People are like, oh yes, we're like, yes, we should, and oh, we should not, it's the death of us, like, no, it'll be okay, and people are yelling at each other. So John Hancock, he grabs his gavel, he says, decorum, gentlemen, decorum! We have to talk about this. And then so one of the delegates from Pennsylvania, he asked to be recognized, and so the chair recognizes the delegate from Pennsylvania. I forget his name. He rises and he says, I understand the need for independence. I know that there are women and children and our brothers and sisters at the door with the British pounding. But we have to take pause and consider what we're doing. If we declare independence today, then there is nothing keeping the wrath of the entire British Army from bearing down upon us. They will burn down our towns. They will rape our women and kill our children. Nothing will stop them. You say, well, the French will come, but how do you know the French will come? We will be on our own. And you think that our small forces can prevent the most powerful navy in our time? What chance do we have to stand up to them? If you declare independence, you are signing our death warrants. By declaring independence, you're sending us out into the storm on a boat made of paper. And we sat down and I was like, oh my God. He might be right. Because it is true. You don't know what would happen. No one is coming to help us. The French haven't said they would help us. If we declare independence, are we on our own? And do we have the capacity to fight the British on our own? We don't. I'm sorry, we don't even have a navy. How are we to fight them? And so people are given pause, like maybe he's right. But then John Adams from Boston stands up and he says, I'd like to be recognized. And the chair recognizes John Adams from Boston. John Adams says, well, I understand the hesitation for pause. But you speak of women and children, with the British at their doorsteps, but those are my children and my wife with the British at their doorstep, at my doorstep. My friends, my children, my wife, they are in danger while you sit here with your Quaker principles trying to avoid any type of war when war is at our doorstep. We have reason, we have tried, and yet you still have us lay down and allow the British to walk all over us. Are we not men? Are we not to stand up and fight for what we believe in? For the last 10 years, we've seen our rights erode away and we've done nothing to stop it. If we do nothing now, what type of men are we? If we die now, at least we died trying to fight something that we believed in. Because while I live, let me live in my own country. While I live, let me live in a free country. And so he sat down and I was, oh my God, yeah! Free country! That's what I want. And so the entire thing, raises, and everyone's like, glad handing John Adams. Everyone's like, yeah, we should do that. But the chair says, okay, everyone calm down. There are two motions on the floor. One is to recognize motion for independence. We're not going to vote on this today. In the meantime, I want John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. You guys are going to come together and you're going to write this Declaration of Independence for us, and we'll decide to vote on it in a few weeks. They're like, okay. So they go off and write. Well, eventually, on July 4th, 1776, after much more debate and conversation, the delegates convened back in that room. Technically, it's really July 3rd, 1776, but don't worry about that. They voted on the 3rd, and it was announced on the 4th, but it's fine. So they convene in that room, and they say, so the motion on the floor is whether or not these states ought to be free and independent. And so we'll put it to a roll call vote. This is a big deal, folks. No one has ever done this before, ever. And say, Rhode Island, how do you vote? Rhode Island, vote yes. South Carolina, how do you vote? South Carolina votes yes. We're like, oh, we got South Carolina, that's good. North Carolina, how do you vote? North Carolina votes yes. Pennsylvania votes yes. We go down the line. And eventually, Massachusetts, how do you vote? Massachusetts votes yes. So he writes down his ledger with 13 votes for. Actually, with 12 votes for, 0 against, and 1 abstention. One state did not vote, but it's still unanimous. The motion passes. And it was quiet in the room. Because they all just had to let it sink in what they had just done. For the first time in our human history, a government was created by the decisions of these men. A government founded on principles and on laws. And they were going to break away and create their own society. But that they also have to recognize the fact that they were now going to put the entire weight of the British Army on their shoulders. But this document was so important to them, they said, yes, this will be our founding principles. This Declaration of Independence will justify and explain to the world who we are and why we did it. So folks, I'm going to present to you the Declaration of Independence. It is. So, what we're going to do right now, I want you guys to read elements of the Declaration of Independence on your own. So, I'm going to go ahead and pass out copies of it. Everyone's a copy? You may write on it. I'm going to have you guys do this in your notebook. I should also note the class, the cohort average, guys, is 73.58. So the cohort average was 73.58, in case you guys were curious about that. The cohort average was 73.58. In any case, your task, folks, is to read the first, second, and last paragraph on the back, okay? What I want you guys to do is to read each section. I want you to explain in your own words what you think this text is saying and be able to cite how you know it's saying that. Does that make sense? So pretty much you're going to go ahead and underline some stuff on your notes of this declaration. You're going to highlight, underline, whatever, and based on what you know about it, you're going to then say, oh, well, this says that when it says among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature's God entitles them, that means blah, 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 blah. Does that make sense? You don't have to rewrite these, your citations. You can put like a number next to it, and then just in your notes like 1, that's what that is, and 2, that's what that is, 3, that's what that is. But I want you to be able to say, oh, this means this because it said this in the document. Does that make sense, folks? I'm going to give you guys about 15 minutes to read through paragraph 1, 2, and 4. And again, provide the main ideas or arguments. You don't have to restate everything, but read through as much of it as you can based on what you understand. Make sure you read one paragraph first and try to analyze that, and then move on to the next one and analyze that. But there's no sense in reading everything and then understanding nothing, right? So try to do it one paragraph at a time. Once you're good with paragraph 1, try to pull out at least one thing that paragraph is saying, and we'll move on to the next one. This is Old English, folks. So if you're struggling with the English, you can ask me, or you can just try to read through it, ask someone else. But do your best. Most of this is stuff that you should at least be able to get the gist of, okay? So I'll give you guys about 15 minutes. You can talk, discuss with whomever else, help you understand the document. But first, read. Get to work, folks. 15 minutes. Thank you.
You've got mail.
Can you turn the speaker on the right side? There's a knob. On the right side. On the bottom. There's a knob. Yeah, turn it all the way towards you. There you go.
Read through that document, folks. If there's something you're having trouble with, let me know. 9 minutes. Again, try to do one paragraph at a time.
the people, we the people.
So man is supposed to be this overarching term for all mankind.
Okay, so that's why this would be people.
It should be.
So this means people. Or men.
It can be debated what that means. Because, I mean, how long do they take for women to get raped? Right? So
Yeah.
people say, oh, all men are haters. Like, oh, we can say women.
Okay.
And also, what's implied is which men.
Oh, that's
So, it's also what's not there that's important.
All right, folks, so let's take a look at this document. Move that to the side. All right, let's see here. First paragraph. When the course of events become necessary for one people. Let's see. Tell us what you were able to pull out of this. Let's start off with Josue. What are some things, or what are some of the arguments that are in this first paragraph? What's one thing they might be saying?
That whenever people lose their rights, they should get them back.
And where does it say that?
When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for people to solve the political past which have connected them.
So you're saying what this means to you is what again?
Whenever you lose your rights, you should get them back.
When it comes to events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve political bands which have connected them. That's not exactly what that means. So when in the course of human events, what does that mean?
When things happened already.
Yeah, since it's like in history, right, in history, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to another. What does that mean?
Those are separate from rewritten.
Yeah, like they want to break or dissolve or break up their relationship of their bands with one another. It's talking about breaking away from England. So it's not necessarily about rights. It's just about how when in the course of human events, or like when someone's angry, that's pretty much what that's saying in that first part. Let's see, let's go with someone else. What else do you see as that first part? Martin, what else do you see in this first paragraph?
I don't know, but I underline the separate and equal stations to which laws of nature and of nature's God entitled to them.
So the separate law and separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them. Who gets to have these laws, or who's entitled, or who's given these laws that nature and nature's God gives them? Not man.
The colonies?
It actually comes back to the first part. And to assume among the powers of the earth. What does it mean to assume among the powers of the earth? What does it mean to assume in this case? Raise your hand. Who thinks they can take? Let's take a guess. But who thinks they know what assume means? To assume among the powers of the earth. Want to guess, Roger?
They want to become one of them.
Yeah, it means become. So to become among the powers of the earth. So to become among the powers of the earth. And who are the powers of the earth? Who are the powers of the earth?
Powerful countries.
Britain, France, Spain. So to assume among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which laws of nature and nature's God entitles them. So what types of powers do they get? The laws given to them by nature and nature's God. So we're saying, what do we want to do? To assume among the powers of the earth, what do we want to do? We want to become independent, right? That's the first part. We want to become independent. We want to be like the other countries. And in this last part, it's telling us why we're writing this whole thing in the first place. So Trisha, why are we writing this in the first place? It's all in that last part here. Precisely. It's to declare the causes which impel them to separation. Pretty much it's saying clearly, the reason why we're writing this is because we want to explain why. But it's not to King George. But you're right, though. The analysis is correct. To declare the causes which impel them to separation. Why are we, declaring independence? We want you to understand that. So again, number one, they're explaining that they're going to declare independence, and two, they're going to explain why. Does that make sense, folks? The first paragraph is, here's why we're doing it. Number two. Paragraph 2. In paragraph 2, it's a little bit more lengthy, but there's a lot of different things they talk about in the second paragraph. We'll start off with Enrique Gonzalez. What are some of the things you read in this paragraph? It doesn't have to be in order, just name some stuff. Uh-huh.
Create or institute new government.
Uh-huh.
I just thought that meant if the government ever found they could change it up or just get rid of it totally.
Precisely. So if the government becomes destructive, if the government becomes bad, what do we as the people have the right to do?
Change it.
Change, overthrow, rebel. This is known as the right to rebellion. We have the right to rebellion if the government mistreats us. Because what if we didn't have this right and the government was terrible? Would we just have to deal with it? We're saying we don't have to deal with it. If the government becomes terrible in the future, we have the right to rebel. And that's why we're doing it right now. What other things is stated in here beside that right to rebellion? Suzette, what else is mentioned besides right to rebellion? What about the last sentence? Usurpations? So what's he saying there?
I guess the British have been
Like, I mean, you're right. What have they been doing? Let's use a word to describe. Like, what have the British been doing? Mistreatment. Yeah, they're mistreating them over a long period of time. It's a repeated history of injuries and usurpation. They've mistreated us. Let's do one more person for this paragraph. Let's go with Yesenia. What else might you have read in this paragraph? There's some stuff right in the beginning. There's some stuff in the middle there. Just pick and choose.
Towards the end where it says, when a long train
Okay, so what is that saying?
No, it didn't. To reduce them under absolute despotism
Uh-huh.
in the right, it is their duty to throw out such government and provide cars for their interest.
So what is that saying?
To like abolish them so they have better protection.
Exactly. So again, if the government is terrible, we should overthrow it, right? So again, that was made in the first part, and they said it again. So is that really important to them? This idea of right to rebellion. That's really key. There's still two other parts here that, or at least one other part that we should definitely mention. What's one other key part, Sadie? Yeah, definitely. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. What are these known as?
Our guardian rights.
Unalienable rights. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Inspired by which Enlightenment philosopher? Not Plato. John Locke. Plato is a Greek. John Locke. And John Locke was not life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. John Locke was what? Life, liberty, and property. Property. Life, liberty, and property. One other line that I really like in the Declaration of Independence, I'm always a big fan of, is, where is it? All experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. That's one of my favorite lines because it says, we as a people, we're used to suffering. We suffer all the time. And do we always rebel because of that? No, we're like, we deal with it. But when that suffering becomes too much, do we then have the right to rebel? Now, yeah, we put up a lot of crap. But when it becomes a bit much, then we have the right to get angry. And we've been putting up with a lot, is what they're saying there. I think that's a very sassy way to put it. Lastly, paragraph, last one. Let's go with Jerry. What are some of the things you noticed here? Shh, quiet down. Say that one more time.
The colonies declared independence
Right.
from the oppression in all forms against British.
Definitely. So that these United Colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, and that they absolve their allegiance to the British Crown. So like very clearly, we're independent, and we absolve our allegiance. We are no longer part of this empire. Very good. And Enrique, what else? The last paragraph. You didn't get that far? So, Brian, what else? Or not Brian, Brianna. You did the same part? Okay, who can add to this? What else do we notice in here that's always pretty important? Jacob, what else?
Sorry. A political connection between them and the states of Great Britain ought to be totally dissolved.
Yeah, so all political connection between them and Great Britain ought to be politically dissolved. So again, clearly we're just like breaking away. We're breaking up with everyone. What else, Sadie?
The last sentence, I thought was important because that's everything.
So what are they saying there?
It's just like asking. It's like the final sentence is just like asking, like, oh, like we want like your approval and like your honor and like protection and stuff.
Yeah, like, we're going to protect each other, and God, please protect us as we move forward here. Emma?
Absolve all allegiance to the British Crown and that all political connection between them and the states of Great Britain is totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy wars with peace and joint alliances, establish commerce, and do all other kinds of things which independence may recognize.
So what is that last part saying?
We're officially our own.
We're our own country, and what types of benefits come with that? But specifically, what do they get to do? war, and what else is really important. Now, they did this for a reason, guys. They wrote this document for a reason. What else do they get to do now that they are an independent state? Contract alliances. Because, folks, who was this written for? It wasn't written for the king. The king knew why they were rebelling. Who was it written for? Not for the colonists. They knew why they were rebelling. It wasn't for the British people. They knew why we were rebelling. It was for the world. Guys, the supreme judge of the world. Because now we're saying, all right, we've broken up with the British and we need help picking up our stuff. Who wants to come with us to get our stuff from the British? And so the idea is that they're letting the French know. They're letting the Spanish and the Dutch and the Prussians know. We're single and we're ready to mingle. Okay? And we're going to need some help moving out of the British government. So if you want to come, we need help with that. Okay, so the idea is that they're declaring to the rest of the world because, hey, we can have alliances now. You can be our best friend and you can help us defend ourselves. Does that make sense, folks? Okay, that's a Declaration of Independence. Let's end today with America's war for independence. All right, so the War for America's Independence and the American Revolution. Here we go. So we're going to talk about advantages and disadvantages first. Let's talk about American advantages. Let's talk about American advantages, or l'avantage d'Amérique. American advantages. And here you see the 3 American flags we'll be using during this war. The Don't Tread on Me flag, very obvious. Don't step on me, I'll bite you. This flag comes back, the Join or Die flag. What is that suggesting? Yeah, the colonies should work as one, otherwise we'll die. And of course, the original stars and bars, the 13 stripes and 13 stars. So. Here are their advantages. Number 1, they're fighting a defensive war. They're fighting a defensive war. So why might that be considered an advantage if they're fighting a defensive war? How does that help? Huh? Well, they're defending themselves. So why is that an advantage, though? That they're defending themselves. Roger?
They'll just sit here, prepare their homeland to like wait for them to come here. They just attack them.
Well, true. I mean, they are defending themselves, but again, why is that an advantage to the Americans? Trisha? They know the soil. I mean, it's their home court, so they have like home court advantage. They know their own soil. And so there's an advantage. Also, the best part about a defensive war is, in order for them to win, do they have to take over England? No. In order for them to win, all they have to do is not lose. So does a tie count as a win for them?
Yeah.
A tie is a win. A loss is a loss. A win is a win. A tie is a win. Loss is a loss. So all they have to do is just wait, and then they win, right? That's pretty good. So they're fighting a defensive war, which means that's in their favor already. Another advantage, folks, their soldiers are more passionately committed. Their soldiers are just more passionately committed. Because what are they fighting for, these soldiers that are more passionately committed? What are they, as American soldiers, are fighting for, Jesus?
Their rights.
Their rights and their lives, right? They're fighting for their livelihood. So these American soldiers are more passionately committed because they're fighting for their rights and their land, their livelihoods. Whereas, what are the British soldiers fighting for? Loyalty, maybe just the pay, right? They're getting paid to be there, so that's why they're fighting. It's not as committed. They also have international assistance. They have assistance from the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch. So they come and help them fight the British. And in particular, folks, do you guys remember the name of the French admiral that really helped out the Americans? It was Le Marquis de Lafayette. Le Marquis de Lafayette was the French admiral that provided the navy that we did not have, so that was very helpful. They were also helped out by the Dutch general von Steuben. This was a guy that he was a guy who came to America. He's like, hey, so I hear that you're fighting a war against the British. I'd like to offer my services. I'm very good at fighting. George Washington's like, oh, sure. He's like, oh, yeah, I've won all these battles. Like, yeah, come train my troops. So von Steuben, like, trained his troops. He helped fight in the war. And it turned out later that von Steuben was not a general. He was just some random guy that came to America, lied to Washington, and said, I'd like to train your troops and fight in a war. And luckily, he was really good at it. But he was just like some guy that came to America and helped out. And it was lucky that he was good at what he did. We can command of people. He's like, yeah, so train my soldiers. Like, oh, yeah. And like, he's like, probably just imagine, like, what would I have them do if I was a soldier? They run. All right, run. Let's go run, guys. And they shoot guns. Oh, let's shoot the guns and whatever. But yeah, luckily that worked out. They also had Washington's leadership. Another advantage was Washington's leadership. Again, not a great general, but why was he a great person to be leader? Jesus? Huh? He inspired. He was great for inspiration. And what else? Well, again, why Washington, Amalia? He's a unifying figure. So again, those two key points for Washington's leadership, inspiration and a unifying figure. That's why we chose George Washington. He was an inspiration and a unifying figure.
How is George Washington not general?
He just kept on like, he would attack when he wasn't supposed to. He'd go right into traps when he knew that he'd be outflanked and stuff like that, where his military strategy was just not very good. He's like, I'm going to charge in the battle. Like, no, you should wait and think about this. He's like, no, I think this will work. And it didn't, so. Another key technique was guerrilla warfare, obviously. So again, they didn't like throw guerrillas at each other. They like hid behind trees and walls and not stand in straight lines. Okay, disadvantages. Number 1, a shortage of weapons, supplies, and money. The disadvantages are that they had a shortage of weapons, supply, and money. So where'd they get their weapons and supplies from? Well, they first stole it from the British fort, and then they got it from the French. But again, there was a shortage of weapons, supply, and money. That's a problem. Number 2, no professional army. Most of their soldiers are what as a profession? They're farmers, and so do they have to leave from time to time to tend to their crops? Because their argument is that, look, it's great to be fighting for my rights, but if I have no food to feed my family, what's the point? And so they had no professional army because they were mostly farmers who left for harvest. A third disadvantage is their lack of unity. What were the names of those that supported the British in the colonies? The Loyalists, good. So they were disunited. There was a lack of unity because they were Loyalists. What's the other name for Loyalists? Tories. Oh, by the way, under more soldiers, more passionately committed, what was the name? If we're loyalists for loyal to the king, what's the opposite? Patriots. So the colonists were known as patriots if they were support of the revolution. What's the other term for them? The Whigs. The Whigs were a party during one of the English civil wars that opposed the king. So every time you're against the king, you're typically known as a Whig. So like if you'd hated me and you wanted to form a political party, you'd be the Whig Party because you hated me, and then that would work out. I forget, I think just the other party that supported the king at the time during the English Civil War was the Tories. So there was a civil war between the Whigs and the Tories that had to do with the king. So we have a civil war now between the Whigs and the Tories, whether you're for the king or against the king. All right, folks, British advantages. Number 1, they had the largest navy in the world. So British advantages, they had the largest navy in the world. That's pretty good. You can blockade and attack and do whatever else. So largest navy in the world. 2, they had a professional army. They fought all the time. 3, they had unlimited money. They did. They had unlimited money. 4, they had loyalists that could be used as what? Spies. And number 5, they hired mercenaries, slaves, and Native Americans to fight against the colonists. What would they promise slaves? What would they promise Native Americans? Their land. Say, hey, if you drive out the colonists, you'll win. So they paid mercenaries, slaves, and Native Americans to fight the colonists. The British disadvantages, and we'll be done with just 2. The 2 British disadvantages you need to know. Number 1, foreign soil, because they did not know the territory. So 1 British disadvantage is foreign soil. And the last thing you need to know for today, their disadvantage was adapting to guerrilla warfare. Were they used to it? No. The colonists did not use guerrilla warfare for long. Even though we assume they fought the entire time with it, no. You know why people fight in straight lines, folks? Because guns are inaccurate. So if there's a ton of you shooting, if the bullet goes left or right, you're bound to hit someone. But if you're shooting from a tree and trying to hit someone, you're bound to hit nothing. So guerrilla warfare is not very effective. So they stopped using it and they eventually fought in straight lines. Have a good weekend. You have homework, but it's not too much. And yeah, go do that. Otherwise, see you later. Bye, Paula. Thank you. Enrique, I didn't get her picture. No. I got Ivan, but not yours. So double check the period 2 folder and see if there's someone with your name on it. mrkinglphs. Okay, no. Gmail.com. Janelle, what's up?